So we're going to be looking at something pretty hilarious here from Prager University, the university that is completely a sham. It's as real as Trump University, except PragerU, at least in its, I've seen at the bottom of their website, they explain that they're not an accredited university. But there's an interesting trend that PragerU has been doing, which is somewhat interesting. It's that they take these issues, and what they do is they use the person who would most have credibility. So the example that we're going to be looking at here, there's this video entitled "The Inconvenient Truth About the Democratic Party." Now, of course, they made this video because the Republican Party has been struggling a lot to be able to capture the vote of minorities, to be able to capture the vote of essentially any minority, especially the black vote, especially because those go in like the 90s in favor of the Democrats pretty much every election cycle. So, for example, like this video we're going to be looking at, like who would you expect would be the person that you would want to do that? It's a black woman. So they have like this. They even made this video about like this whole thing about I forgot what it was called, but it's the intersectionality, and they have like all these different of what they call victim groups. And so what you guys are going to be seeing here is Prager University is going to be dropping the hammer on the truth about the history. They call it the inconvenient truth of the Democratic Party.
When you think about racial equality and civil rights, which political party comes to mind? The Republicans or the Democrats? Most people would probably say the Democrats, but this answer is incorrect. Since its founding in 1829, the Democratic Party has fought against every major civil rights initiative and has a long history of discrimination. The Democratic Party defended slavery, started the Civil War, opposed Reconstruction, founded the Ku Klux Klan, imposed segregation, perpetrated lynchings, and fought against the Civil Rights Acts of the 1950s and 1960s. In contrast, the Republican Party was founded in 1854 as an anti-slavery party. Its mission was to stop the spread of slavery into the new Western territories with the aim of abolishing it entirely. This effort, however, was dealt a major blow by the Supreme Court in the 1857 case Dred Scott versus Sandford. The court ruled that slaves aren't citizens, they're property. The 7 justices who voted in favor of slavery, all Democrats. The 2 justices who dissented, both Republicans. The slavery question was, of course, ultimately resolved by a bloody civil war. The commander-in-chief during that war was the first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, the man who freed the slaves. 6 days after the Confederate Army surrendered, John Wilkes Booth, a Democrat, assassinated President Lincoln. Lincoln's vice president, a Democrat named Andrew Johnson, assumed the presidency. But Johnson adamantly opposed Lincoln's plan to integrate the newly freed slaves into the South's economic and social order. Johnson and the Democratic Party were unified in their opposition to the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, the 14th Amendment, which gave blacks citizenship, and the 15th Amendment, which gave blacks the vote. All 3 passed only because of universal Republican support. During the era of Reconstruction, federal troops stationed in the South helped secure rights for the newly freed slaves. Hundreds of black men were elected to Southern state legislatures as Republicans, and 22 black Republicans served in the U.S. Congress by 1900. The Democrats did not elect a black man to Congress until 1935. But after Reconstruction ended, when the federal troops went home, Democrats roared back into power in the South. They quickly reestablished white supremacy across the region with measures like black codes, laws that restricted the ability of blacks to own property and run businesses, and they imposed poll taxes and literacy tests used to subvert black citizens' right to vote. And how was all of this enforced? By terror, much of it instigated by the Ku Klux Klan, founded by a Democrat, Nathan Bedford Forrest. As historian Eric Foner, himself a Democrat, notes, in effect, the Klan was a military force serving the interests of the Democratic Party. President Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, shared many views with the Klan. He resegregated many federal agencies and even screened the first movie ever played at the White House, the racist film, The Birth of a Nation, originally entitled The Klansman. A few decades later, the only serious congressional opposition to the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964 came from Democrats. 80% of Republicans in Congress supported the bill, less than 70% of Democrats did. Democratic senators filibustered the bill for 75 days until Republicans mustered the few extra votes needed to break the logjam. And when all of their efforts to enslave blacks, keep them enslaved, and then keep them from voting had failed, the Democrats came up with a new strategy. If black people are going to vote, they might as well vote for Democrats, as President Lyndon Johnson was purported to have said about the Civil Rights Act. I'll have them voting Democrat for 200 years. So now, the Democratic Party prospers on the votes of the very people it has spent much of its history oppressing. Democrats falsely claim that the Republican Party is the villain, when in reality, it's the failed policies of the Democratic Party that have kept blacks down. Massive government welfare has decimated the black family. Opposition to school choice has kept them trapped in failing schools. Politically correct policing has left black neighborhoods defenseless against violent crime. So when you think about racial equality and civil rights, which political party should come to mind? I'm Carol Swain, professor of political science and law at Vanderbilt University for Prager University. Thanks for watching. To keep our videos free, click here.
So here's the thing about all of that they just went on. Pretty much almost everything that they said in there was true. The Democratic Party was actually the party of the racist people. It was the party of white supremacy, and it was indeed the party of the KKK. That is totally true. There's no denying that. But what you're doing there and what you're committing is a lie by omission when you don't mention that the parties actually flipped, and that shortly after the Civil Rights Act passed, all of the people who were, of the Confederacy, who were part of the Democratic Party, left or were replaced by other Democrats. People like Strom Thurmond was probably the most well-known one, who switched parties immediately. He was one of the Democrats who was fighting to keep the filibuster up. That he was one of the main ones trying to keep that filibuster because he was a Dixiecrat. He was a Southern racist Democrat. So it was a split at the time because the process of switching parties was still going through at the time. And, as Lyndon B. Johnson said, I just gave the Republican Party, the Southern vote for, I think he said, 200 years. So there's no doubt that the stuff that they said was true. There's no doubt the KKK was totally the Democratic Party's, mechanism. It was what they used, and the KKK was entirely of the Democratic Party, no doubt whatsoever. But they're not telling you that the Democratic Party was not the liberal party. They were the conservative party. They were the racist party. They were the party of the southern states, and the parties actually ended up flipping, and that's why you had LBJ signing into law the Civil Rights Act. So that is sort of the issue that is going on here when they're purposely going out of their way to omit information. But, what's inconvenient about that? I don't understand. What is the inconvenience? The party's flipped. What matters is the ideology today. And as we know, the party of who harbors the neo-Nazis in the Unite the Right rally is not the Democratic Party. So if you're someone who, let's say you're a black person, you're looking to vote, why on planet Earth would you vote for the Republican Party, anyone in the Republican Party, if you were to look at the history of the, let's say you took it in the totality and you looked and said, oh, the Democratic Party has this crazy history of racism. And then now you look and say, holy shit. But in present day, the party that harbors the neo-Nazis is the Republican Party. So we've seen a shit ton of candidates running in the Republican Party who are neo-Nazis this past primary cycle. There was the neo-Nazi named Patrick Little. So there's no doubt whatsoever that today, the party that actually harbors said racist is the Republican Party, not the Democratic Party. So they're trying to lie by omission because they're extremely desperate, because the minority vote is not going in their direction, not even close. The minority vote is going directly the other way, and they're definitely not happy about that. And so they need a different route to go, and this is the route they go by, committing lies by omission.